Welcome to the Fiona Cape Sewalong. This is a fairly simple pattern. This pattern is made up of 5 sections. You got your front, cut 2 of fabric, cut 2 of lining. Got your back, cut 1 of fold of fabric, cut 1 of fold of lining. Got your side, cut 2 of fabric, cut 2 of lining. Got your collar, you only need to cut 1 on the fold of fabric. And your armhole piping, you'll be cutting 4 on the fold of fabric. The fabrics I suggest using for this is a heavy woven fabric, like a denim or a twill, or a thick non-stretch wool. You'd need plus minus the same amount of fabric and lining, so you're looking at, to be safe, you can look at 2.5 meters or 3 yards of fabric. So once you've cut out your fabric and transferred all the necessary markings, you're going to start with the armhole piping sections with right sides of fabric facing. So close the side seams of the armhole piping. Clip away the excess corners of fabric, that's the corners on the fold, and turn your piping the right side out and then press this flat. Once you have pressed it flat, finish it off by stitching along the seams and the fold edge. You're going to stitch about 5 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch near the edge. You're then going to take these piping sections, and between the markings on the side sections and the front sections, on the right side of the fabric, you're going to attach the piping. You're going to attach it with the fold edge facing in towards the center of the pattern piece and the raw edge against the raw edge of the fabric. Then baste those into place to make sure that they don't go anywhere. We're now going to move on to the main body of the cape. With right sides of your fabric facing, attach your back and front bodice sections together at the shoulders. You're going to be sewing it with a standard seam allowance. Once you've done that, press the seams. Then you're going to insert the side panel in between the front and back sections. So right sides of fabric facing, attach the side section to front and back sections by joining them from the top marking of the piping, sewing up around the cap of the shoulder seam, and sewing down the seam, joining the side and back sections. You will want to clip along the shoulder seam of the main fabric, so the shoulder seam of the front and back sections that were joined together. So clip this fabric between the two joining markings to assist it to fit neatly with the cap of the side section. As you'll see, the side section resembles the design of a sleeve cap. Once you have stitched it all together, clip again along this curve but with both fabrics joined together. This will help you to allow the garment to sit neatly once it is completed and turned right side out. Sew closed the lower seam, so that seam that joins the front to the side section below the armhole sections. Sew close that lower seam from the piping down to the hemline. Then you're going to be joining the lining in the same way, starting with joining the lining sections at the shoulder seams. Then you're going to be inserting the sides into the bodice of the lining by attaching it in the same way as you did the main bodice fabric, sewing up from the piping marking up around the shoulder and down the back, and then you're going to be sewing that lower front seam again. Remember to clip your shoulders in the lining as well. Great, so now your lining sections and your main fabric sections are both complete. Now we're going to be joining those together. So attaching your lining with right sides of fabric facing the right sides of the lining. Attach the main fabric and lining section together along the front seams only. So to start, we're only going to do the front seams. Once you have sewn those front seams, turn your cape right side out. So you look at the right side of the fabric and press those front seams flat. Now comes a bit of a tricky part. You're going to be sewing the fabric and the lining together at the armholes. You can't do it with the cape right side out as it was before, because you'll actually find you won't be able to turn your cape right side out properly. It'll become twisted, it just won't work. So what you need to do is have your cape in front of you with the right side of the fabric laid out and the lining out. Then just pin together, you could just use 1 or 2 pins, just pin together the fabric and the lining together at the armholes. Then reach up from the bottom hem in between the 2 fabrics and pull the armhole down through that opening. So you'll be doing this one armhole at a time. You won't be doing both at a time. You'll be doing one armhole at a time and pull it through the opening at the bottom of the cape. Once you've done that, you'll see the pins will help you to make sure you keep the fabric aligned. So then just line up the fabric and the lining together so there's right sides facing all the way around and stitch it together like that. Okay, so do one armhole at a time, putting it through in between the lining and the main fabric down through past the bottom hem and stitching it together like that. Once you have done that and your cape is again right side out, just press those seams. Then you're going to be sewing closed that bottom hem. Now take your cape and turn it wrong side out again and line up the bottom hem of the main fabric and the lining. Line them up nicely, make sure all your seams and everything are lined up, and once you've done that and you've pinned everything together, you're going to stitch that bottom hem closed using a standard seam allowance. Once you have stitched that bottom hem seam closed, clip away the excess fabric in the bottom corners. This is going to allow you that once you turn your cape finally right side out, you can push those corners out nicely without too much bulk in the fabric. Okay, so once you've done that and you've pushed it out, line up all your seams along the center front and along the bottom. Make sure your fabric and your lining seam sits nice and plush together, and then you're going to be pressing that flat. Make sure you press it first. Use a bit of starch in your spray water. I'm a huge fan of using a bit of starch when you're pressing in the process of creating a garment. So press it, make sure it all sits and looks nice and neat, and once you've done that, you can then stitch along those seams. So starting at the top of the collar one end and stitch down the center front along the bottom and then up the other side, and you'll be stitching about 5 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch near the edge of those seams. And that's just going to be finishing off your cape. Then you're going to be doing the same for the pocket where the piping is. Make sure everything is pressed nice and neatly, and then just stitch along those openings. Stitch the seam flat about 5 millimeters from the point where the piping meets the seam. So just stitch it nice and flat just to finish it off and give it a nice professional tailored finish. Then finally, waist close the neckline. So you're going to be joining the main fabric at the lining at the neckline. You're still going to have raw edges there. You're just going to be basting those raw edges together so that the fabric doesn't move independently from one another while you attach the collar. So as you can see, this pattern is actually relatively easy It just takes a lot of time and patience, making sure that you are clipping your corners and pressing everything and sewing. So that's where your time is going to come in. But otherwise it's a relatively easy pattern, and all we have left to do now is to attach that collar. So you're going to start by along one length of the collar. You're going to fold the fabric inwards towards the wrong side by 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch, so your basic seam allowance. You're going to be folding it inwards, pressing it flat and basting it to position so it doesn't move. Then sew close the side seams of your collar. As you can see, even this is a very easy collar to make. There's not too much technical skill that has to go into it. So sew close your side seams, then clip away the excess fabric, just once again to remove the bulk, and that's the excess fabric that's on the side where the fold is. So clip away that excess fabric. Turn your collar right side out, neatly push out those corners and press everything, and you'll see how nice, and especially when you use thick woven fabrics, how nice and neat those collars will look. Now you're going to be joining your collar to the main neck lining of your cape with right sides of fabric facing. Pin the collar to the cape at the center front, so the two center front sections, and at the center back. Then you'll see the actual cape itself will just not quite want to fit into your collar. That's because you have to mold and shape it to do that. So you get to be clipping along the main neckline of the cape. So take your embroidery scissors and clip along the neckline of the cape. You're going to be clipping about every 1.5 centimeters or 5/8 of an inch, and you're only going to be clipping about 1 centimeters or 3/8 of an inch deep. So just clip along the neckline, and then once you've done that, you'll be able to pull, and you'll see the neckline will sit much more easily and comfortably with your actual collar. And this is just one of the processes you can do, that helps you taking a square piece of fabric and molding it into something that's beautiful in 3D. So once the neckline has been clipped and it's fitted to the collar, make sure you pin it into position and then stitch that with a standard seam allowance. Once you've stitched it, press the seam upwards and fold that collar over the seam. So that's part of the collar earlier that you had pressed in. You'll be now taking that and folding it over the neckline, and you'll be encasing that seam, so you're not going to see that seam anymore. Then what you could do is you can pin or baste that so it doesn't move, and then I say pin and baste it because it's much easier to sew around the collar to finish it from the right side. So you're not necessarily going to see that part where on the inside of the cape where the actual collar is lining up with that seam. So make sure it's basted or pinned securely so it's not going to move anywhere. Then stitch along the collar, right around the collar, by 5 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch all the way around the collar, and you'll be securing that seam in place and closing it off quite nicely and finishing off your cape. And then finally all you have left to do is to remove all the basting that you don't want anymore, and there you have it. Your Fiona cape, very simply and very easily, is complete. Feel free to share your creations with us on Instagram at Bula Heart or on Twitter at My Sewing Pattern. And until next time, happy sewing!